Hi, everyone. My name is Juan Carlos. I'm the curator of Aquí Estamos, Here We Are, an act of collective solidarity, regeneration, and celebration between queer artists from the Bay Area and Puerto Rico. And today, I'm super excited to have Zulfi with us. And in a little bit, I'm going to ask you if you can introduce yourself. I just wanted to mention that Zulfi is going to be here for as part of the Aquí estamos weekly conversation, and this is the second conversation that we have. Last week, we had the opportunity of talking with Awilda and Cristobal, who are Puerto Rican artists that live and create in Puerto Rico. And all these videos are going to be located, and you can find them on the Queer Cultural Center YouTube page, which I'll give you the link at the end of this video. So first, Zulfi, thank you again for
my
being
pleasure.
here, for your amazing work. And I always like to say just thank you for being present. Yeah, I think it's really important to thank people for being in a moment with you.
Yes.
And today we're going to be talking about 5 different concepts. And in order to talk about that, Sophie sent me some pictures before the conversation, some images, and that's how it's going to work. We have 5 images, 5 concepts, and mainly Sophie is going to be talking, and I'm going to be listening. And so the first, we're going to be talking about the sense of the world, solidarity, regeneration, celebration, and the
Mhm,
domestic space. Those are the
mhm.
5 kind of topic concepts. And I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for your introduction and for pointing out the need to be present. I am fully in agreement of that. So my name is Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. I have been living in the Bay Area now for 6 years. I'm from Pakistan. But with my mother's Lebanese, my father was Pakistani Iranian. So I come from already a legacy of of people who have been displaced and have had to find themselves again in different worlds and different situations. My mother and father met in Damascus in Syria, where they had me. So a lot of my practice deals precisely with really trying to forge connections between global movements and global struggles, mostly historically, but then and sort of reinterpreting them through a queer lens, inserting queer narrative into histories of guerrilla warfare and struggle where they may have either been erased or or maybe where they didn't exist, so we have to story tell them so storytelling is a big part of my practice. um, and yeah, yeah. And I also have a drag alter ego called Faluda Islam. She's fun. She's a zombie. Um,
And she's here with us,
she's here.
right?
She's here with
She,
us. Yes, yes, most definitely. She's here with us. She's present. We'll hear about her a little bit
yes.
more. I think in one of the images, I feel like she'll definitely be a lot more present.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. And also
Mhm.
at the when we're done talking, I would like for you to talk a little bit about the project that we're gonna be sharing
Oh yeah.
as part of the show. So I'll ask you about that later.
Yes,
But
yes,
first, I
yes,
want to start with our first image, which
yes.
comes from the sense of the world. When and what image and at what point did you understand or have this knowledge of idea of your place in the world and your sense of it?
Yeah, so I mean, this is an image by Anwar Sayed, who, if folks don't know who he is a Pakistani artist who started working with what we would call today queer subject matter in Pakistan as early as the 80s, when and maybe even before, but at a time when Pakistan was under a very, very harsh military dictatorship that was being funded by the United States, the dictatorship of Ziaul Haq. And so he was making very subversive work, work that at the time was very queer, but also not explicitly queer. So a lot of Pakistani artists have had to make work that encourages the audience to read between the lines, to avoid censorship, to avoid um, there have been times in Pakistan's history where galleries have been raided just for showing nude paintings, for example. So, artists have learned how to be very subversive. And I think his imagery looks a lot at specifically the queer male, the Pakistani queer male, the place of this body, and what space does it occupy, and what kind of tensions does it bring up, when you place these bodies together. And a lot of his work is about betrayal, is about the violence of inflicted by and to the male body, the queer male body, and very much how different, I think, levels of power operate. You have very much authoritarian figures in this painting. You have religious figures in this painting. You have potentially a policeman or a soldier with a beret. And then you have this dreamlike figure in the middle holding a crocodile. And it sort of pulls you, I think for me, it like pulls you out, right, of the reality. It takes it into a dreamscape. And I think right now, thinking about my place in the world, thinking about a sense of where I belong in the world, I think I'm definitely moving more and more into a place where I feel like I'm kind of looking in from the outside, right? I think this time of especially of quarantine and distance, but then also then radical change and people coming together and then distance again. I mean, it's really pulling me out of a certain reality. And it's pushing me more and more into the dreamscape. So for me, this painting kind of it emphasizes both what we were talking about before, a certain presence, like there is a physical presence, but there's also very much a distance that goes from reality to dreamscape. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm moving. I'm gonna move.
Yeah. Tell me.
I'm gonna move without letting you know. No,
okay, keep moving. Yeah.
This is great. Solidarity.
Yeah. So I've always said that I take creative collaboration as a form of political solidarity, and I still stick to it. And I think experiments in collaborative process are really important when thinking about political solidarity. And I felt like I could show a bunch of images of performances I've done with artists from many, many different diasporas, both within the Muslim diaspora, the South Asian diaspora, the Arab diaspora, the African diaspora. And but I feel like this image kind of sums up my idea of solidarity. It's a still from a video that's actually a work in progress, but this particular part of the still has been reworked in a lot of performances. And it's the Dome of the Rock, of sort of quite an icon of a building, an icon of a struggle. And the domes of the Dome of the Rock have been flipped to mimic satellites. So essentially, these sites of religious fervor, of political tension, of gathering, they're, I kind of imagine them as spaces that are so imbued with energy, with collective energy, and especially Islam. Like Islam is a globalized faith and saw itself as a globalized faith way before we even had this idea of globalization, because it grew out of a place that was already globalized. And right smack in the Middle East or the Arab world is right smack in the center of Asia, Europe, Africa already. So the Dome of the Rock becomes this center, and then when the dome is flipped to become a satellite, for me it becomes a call, right? A call towards the world to act in solidarity, a call towards potentially aliens who are looking at human beings just totally tripped out at what's happening. And I think for me, Faluda Islam is I think where me, Zulfi, becomes goes out of the body, right? she starts to look from the outside in. Faluda Islam is was this, the story behind Faluda Islam is that she was a queer guerrilla fighter who was martyred in the Great Third Intifada or Third Uprising, which is kind of happening right now. So it's kind of hard to make art of a speculative fiction when the speculative fiction is happening as we speak. But her world was composed of a great deal of absurdity, right? Like, it's absurd to think of a mosque turning into a satellite, right? It's absurd to think of a zombie coming back to life as a soothsayer and resurrecting an army of zombies to topple, oppressive regimes. But at the same time, violence is absurd. The violence that many communities of color face is absurd. So a lot of my work, and a lot of particularly work around this series, which is called Tomorrow We Inherit the Earth, which includes videos and textiles, really harks on that absurdity of violence, and takes that energy into another place.
Thank you. And talking about Faluda.
Yeah. There she is. Yeah, great.
And we're gonna regeneration.
Regeneration, yeah. So as I said before, just to very quickly repeat myself, Faluda Islam's a zombie. She regenerates. And this performance is called Aleph is for Awakening, which I actually toured just before we went into quarantine. So it was great that I got it out there. Sorry, there's a big truck passing by. Okay.
Good.
So yeah, I mean, I think for me, regeneration is pretty crucial. I mean, a lot of my performance work is actually my way of queerly, I use this word, and you can ask me for clarification if it's confusing, but queerly reviving my father, who died in 1996 when I was only 6 years old. He was killed by police outside our home in Karachi, and it was a violent death. It was a violent moment. It was very clear to me as a 6-year-old. It was a violent death. So death has been always at the tip of my mind in my work. Death, and particularly martyrdom. So Faluda Islam is martyred in the Great Queer Intifada, and she is resurrected. So she becomes the literal living martyr, and through resurrection and through regeneration, she can therefore question these ideas that we have around the valorization of martyrdom, the valorization of running into violence and seeing death as the only form of liberation. And she takes into account, why is it that people see martyrdom as the only weapon left? The body becomes, right, the site of violence, but it also becomes the site of liberation, right? And when everything has been taken away from you, what else is left except your own body? The body becomes a weapon, right? The martyr is him or herself or themselves a weapon. And I think a lot of people find that really hard to understand. Coming from another human being, coming from a story told by another human being. But I think they understand it more when it comes from a zombie. And it comes from this living martyr that has to resurrect and tell you a story that takes you outside of reality a little bit. So regeneration for me is important as a point of revisiting. Revisiting a loved one, revisiting a story, revisiting a tragedy, and trying to make sense of it.
I think something that's really beautiful right now, that when you're talking about regeneration and you're talking about the body, that's something that also happened with Cristobal and Awilda. When they were talking about regeneration, they were talking about the body as art and the body as something that it's really precious to us. And I'm like, so beautiful, and I'm so excited for these parallels about talking about regeneration and always including the body in different realms and senses. I think that's really powerful.
For sure, I agree. Yeah.
Thank you. And last, not last. We have two more.
We have two more.
Celebration. So I'm like, wait, No,
So
celebration. So
so
solidarity, regeneration, celebration.
celebration.
Yes.
Okay, honestly, I was elated when I saw this, when I saw the video, when I saw this happen. It made my week. I have been rewatching this video on multiple different news sources over and over and over again. I lived in the UK for 6 years. I went to a due to various different maybe to speak euphemistically, very uncomfortable political situations in Pakistan. I had to be shipped off very quickly to the United Kingdom. I went to a boarding school. It was definitely a privileged boarding school. I went for high school for a couple of years. And for the first time in the United Kingdom, I was confronted with my own brownness. Not to say I had not been to white countries before, but never had I been so singled out by not only a student body that was overwhelmingly white, but also a teaching body that was not only overwhelmingly white, but overwhelmingly conservative, pro-British imperialism, very much historically revisionist. I had a teacher once tell me in this boarding school called Oundle, I'm just going to call them out, racist place. In the boarding school, the teacher, I was talking about British uses of force actually towards the end of the British Raj, and how protests were being aerial bombed at one point by the British. And he was like, well, where are your facts? And I'm like, well, I could bring you a book. And he was like, well, Zulfikar, a lot of historians are saying that the British should stop apologizing for colonialism and instead start asking for thanks, for appreciation, for gratitude. So obviously, being in the United Kingdom, then for 6 years later, I went to Scotland, which was a much more progressive place. But still, like the way imperialism, the way uncomfortable history is just totally erased from the British consciousness, except by various different radical subgroups or whatever, and then to and especially the history of slavery, because the U.S., of course, we see the U.S., Britain sees the U.S. and they're like, well, we're nothing like them, but actually you started all this bullshit. So and the U.S. just sort of took over, right? Mm-hmm. So and expanded on these ideas. So so to see such an incredible action in Bristol, like the site of the British slave trade, the site of the sort of capital of the British African Company, the British East India Company, like all of these companies that just exploited over and over again, and then to see the statue toppled, and then not only toppled but dragged by hand to the dock and thrown in the water just gave me life. I don't know what's going to happen in the future with this moment, but I think when artists, something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I can get very dramatic, but I think when artists are thinking like, oh my goodness, what can I do? Like, I feel like especially artists who are working in futurism and speculative fiction like I am, and then now the future's here and the speculation is realizing and we're not quite sure what to do. Well, you don't actually have to make art. You can just celebrate. You can be joyful that this is happening. Your art, just tell yourself your art was doing something, right? Just tell yourself that actually you were useful at one point. You were the truth teller at one point. Now the truth is being told, right? And so I think it is equally artful and creative to join someone in a march and to celebrate a statue being thrown into a river, and to celebrate small achievements in this movement, such as the arrest of various different police officers, such as the fact that calls for defunding the police are not just considered a splinter leftist anarchist imaginary movement, but are actually being taken into account by not only by the state, but also by a lot of people. Like the fact, last night I was watching video after video on CNN of defunding the police, of calls to defund the police, of calls of calling out the police. And I don't want to over romanticize anything, but truly this is incredible.
Yeah.
I just want to sit with that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
There's something about all these images that are coming out where I think we all forgot that everyone's wearing masks because we have normalized it. But every time
Right.
I see one of these images, all I look is like, if in the future we stop wearing masks, because who knows what's gonna happen,
Mm.
we're gonna look at this like 20 years from now. Why was everyone wearing a mask? They're like,
Right.
I don't
Oh,
know.
because there was a pandemic at the same time.
Yeah.
Yes, happening. I mean, it's so, I thought, I just want to add one more thing. I was,
Yeah.
and I think maybe I brought this up at one time with you, but I brought this up a lot. But I was scared that when the whole shelter in place started happening and people started being shoved back into their houses and not allowed to gather more than 2 people and all of the stuff, I was like, oh my goodness, like people just in the middle of like when all these protests started gaining momentum, people are going to be scared to go back out again. And then lo and behold, people are not scared to go back out again. I think the human spirit and human rage is so strong. You can't keep it indoors, you know? But yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
This is really specific right now because this is not your domestic space anymore, right?
It's not anymore. But this was where a lot of the magic happened for the images in the project that we're showing, which is funnily enough not the images I'm showing here, but this is where a lot of that magic happened. This is actually in a co-op that I used to live in San Francisco. And when I was sort of like half on the way out, and then shelter in place happened, and then that got super delayed, and it's a big house, so there's a lot of space. So even though I was moving out, I'm very grateful for the space and actually the time also to create. But yeah, this was the domestic space. Yes.
And what does it like for you? What does the domestic space means? Like, how do you see it?
Wow. I see myself on a precipice of actually changing my relationship to domestic space. I think for me, the domestic space ultimately is one of safety. I think that's how I've always viewed the domestic space as a place where I didn't have to worry too much. Or I felt safe. I mean, really simply, the word safe, I think, encapsulates so much. And then also a place, I mean, I think living in a co-op for like 3 years, more than 3 years, 3.5 years, and then of course having lots of roommates before then, the domestic space, I think for me in my 20s has been a lot about actually community, right? Of being able to congregate and being able to be a community and safely be a community, right? Sort of a safe space to engage and talk, make mistakes and be corrected. And moving from one place to another, you're constantly asked in each domestic space that you enter to be open to being corrected and having your mind changed, and actually that you don't know everything, right? And especially coming in from Pakistan and then going to the UK and then coming to the US, I have to say it took me a long time to understand how so many things functioned in the United States. How did race function in the United States, right? What's the word I'm looking for? Uh, Not reformations, but when you give someone back, like
Reparations?
reparations. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Like what do reparations look like in this context in the United States, in a place that is not Pakistan, that was directly colonized by the British, but in fact was brutalized and colonized in a very different way. So the domestic space has also been a space of learning for me for a very, very long time. And making, obviously, as you can see, I'm constantly making. I'm constantly agitated and making.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
before we end, would you mind telling us a little bit about the project that we're gonna be showing as
Yeah.
part of Aquí Estamos, and it's gonna be shown on the Queer Cultural Center Instagram, QC The handle is on at QCC_SF. And after July, this interview and all the work is going to be part of a website, which is xpatterns.com. But yeah, I'll let you talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I started making cyanotypes recently. Well, when the pandemic started, I think the first thing I did was go online and order cyanotype chemicals. People were like bulking up on like groceries, and I was like, cyanotype chemicals, like really quickly before everything ran out. And I have, so because I work in fabric, I actually work in muslin a lot, and mostly screen prints, sort of photo-based screen prints on muslin. That are then, quilted, what have you. So I have a lot of spare muslin because, yeah, fabric actually is, the textile industry and fabric in general actually is a very wasteful one. you end up with a lot of scraps. And so a lot of those scraps were perfect enough to make 8x10 kind of format, like pages, essentially. And what I'm trying to do is actually compile a cyanotype book composed of precisely what we were talking about before, which is dreamscapes. And actually, this is a discussion that's happened a lot, that when people went into shelter in place and when people started receiving the news that there was a pandemic and that there was a virus, and that essentially put our, humanity into question, right? Like the sort of hubris of humanity into question. People were having really, really vivid dreams, and I was having really, really vivid dreams too. And within Islam, dreams and dream interpretation is not considered a sort of like new age sort of thing. It's central to belief, actually. It's believed to be more central to belief than logic is. And there's this idea that in Islam, if you see the Prophet Muhammad in your dream, you've seen him, like he came to you, he actually came to you. So for me to sort of compose these dreamscapes out of cyanotype, mixing together various different negatives I have, and making these collages that also bring together a lot of my own archive. So, and when I say my own archive, I mean images that I took but have had so much distance from that it might as well have been done by somebody else in some way. And also images from sort of civilizations that predate Islam, civilizations that have come into contact with Islam, civilizations that have influenced Islam and been influenced by Islam. Because I also don't believe that Islam is a static idea. It's not an isolated faith practiced by some very, very ardent people that only believe in one particular way. No, Islam is a composite of its history and of its culture and of its future. So definitely taking that into account. But yeah, I'm describing it a lot. And the reason why I'm using cyanotypes is one, they are very dreamy. They're very, they have this beautiful dark Prussian blue kind of background, just the materiality of it. And also the ephemerality of it. If you put a cyanotype in, a cyanotype can actually last forever, but if you put it in light, it fades away. And then you put it back into the dark and it comes back. And it has this beautiful sort of trickster spirit to it, which I think is very poetic in itself.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And we'll see there. Yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you, Zulfi. I cannot wait to put all the cyanotypes and for everyone to see them.
Yes, me too.
And yes, because they look like the narrative that they tell as a whole is really powerful. And yeah, so thank you again for participating and just working with me.
Yeah. My pleasure.
It's been really nice.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity.